Well, I knew from the age of 8 that I wanted to be a writer. I asked my dad for a typewriter when I was 8 years old, and I was the kid with the book that was always scribbling away in class. I wrote my first full-length play, I think it's about sort of 40-odd pages, when I was about 9, and it's a funny thing because my background, my parents, my father was a businessman, my mother didn't work, there's never been a writer in my family. It's completely, I was really the fish out of water, and nobody in the family had any belief that I would come to anything. My father in particular, for reasons of his own, tended to ridicule me rather than support me. And I really was born a writer. There never was a plan B in my head. I'm not sure I wanted to write kids' books. I mean, that sort of came out of the blue, that I would write these stories. I wanted to write television, which I do, and theatre, which I do, and film, which I'm glad to say I do. So I have actually achieved some of my ambitions. But to get successful as a kids' writer, I think if I'd thought of that when I was sort of in my teens, I would have been very, very surprised. For years, I was puzzled by the fact that very few, if any, adult authors have managed to write a decent book for kids, and no kids authors have ever managed to write a decent book for adults, unless you count Roald Dahl with his short stories. His novel, incidentally, was horrible and best forgotten. And so I wrote an adult novel a few years ago to see why, to see what would happen. And of course, I made a complete hash of it. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. And why didn't it work? I think in children's writing, I find myself, forgive me using that phrase, I don't even like to hear myself say it, children's writing, but in writing for young adults, whatever, I find myself very much concentrating on a narrative. It's like being swept along a river. You've got no choice about getting out onto the bank or stopping to catch your breath. You've just got to keep swimming and go with it. And nothing matters except that flow. And when I'm writing a kid's book, that's what I feel. When I'm writing an adult book, it's more like wading through a swamp, where you're wondering where to put your foot next, and is a snake going to come and bite you? Because there's so many distractions. Your characters, their psychology, their relationship, their maturity, their occupation, what they had for breakfast, where they live, what they wear. All this sort of clutter comes into your head, and I find it far harder to get that aside and get back to the actual, thrust of the story. So that's in a way why I prefer writing the books that I write. But I'm better at it, and it's also incidentally why I think it is so hard. There are different planets, and it's very difficult for somebody like me to live on the wrong planet.